The interesting bit is how different people use their sketchbooks, because there's no set rules, is there? But I think it takes a little bit of time to work out what works best for you.
And it becomes your authentic type work.
Hi, I'm Ruth Egon.
And I'm Debbie Chatfield.
Welcome to Art Alchemy podcast, where we have authentic conversations on art, the creative process, and cultivating a creative mind.
And today we're going to be talking about sketchbooks. And before we came on, Ruth's been looking up a definition of sketchbooks.
Yeah, I thought it'd be interesting as part of this subject just to do a bit of a Google search and see what came up on the definition of sketchbooks. And interestingly enough, it just came up as book for sketching, which I think is quite a limited kind of definition of a sketchbook, and probably just one element that I use it for.
Yeah, and I think when we discussed it, we both use sketchbooks for so many different things, and that was the point of this episode.
To me, it's not just sketching. I use, yes, part of it will be drawing, but I also use different materials in there. You also use it for thinking about ideas, so I might be jotting things down, researching other artists, other designers, imagery, all sorts.
Yeah, and experimenting with ideas, experimenting with materials. We also use it for reflecting on art. I think that's something we'll discuss later in the episode. We decided that the first thing that we might discuss is types of sketchbooks. But I don't think we're just talking about whether it's cartridge paper or watercolour paper or whether it's a concertina sketchbook or whether it's a certain make. That's not what I was particularly thinking about. I was thinking about what you use your sketchbooks for, so the types of sketchbooks we have as well. So obviously there's two types going on there, the physical type of sketchbook and then how we use them.
I think that's the interesting bit, is how different people use their sketchbooks, because there's no real kind of set rules, is there? But I think it takes a little bit of time to work out what works best for you. So I think it's interesting as well hearing other people's ideas, because it might give you an idea and think, oh, I'm going to try that for a new sketchbook.
It's the same as developing your art. You almost develop your sketchbook work. And what I mean by that is, it's exactly what you said about the choices you make as to what suits you. Yeah. As you develop the style of your work, it's because you're developing the work that suits you, and then it becomes your authentic type work. I think the same happens with sketchbooks. Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. And I think sometimes it's easier, in a way, developing your style, your preferences through a sketchbook. I think it's a really important part of the creative process, and I think part of the reason is because we're not as precious about sketchbooks, because it's not like a finished piece of artwork. It's something private that you can work on, that you don't have to share. And I think that in some ways makes it easier to just get things down on the page rather than worrying about what it looks like. So I think it's a really important thing, no matter what format that you have some sort of space to collect your inspiration, your ideas, your development of ideas.
And I think you've brought something up there that's really, really important, is that with art work, you tend to feel like you're going to share it. With sketchbook work, it can almost be a little diary. It can almost be something that's very private, personal. Really. Yeah. And I always say that to people: don't think that you have to share this. Just go do exactly what you like in it. Yeah. When I first started doing sketchbooks, I was awful because I used to write lists in there, my shopping lists and all sorts. Did you? I don't do that quite as much now. Yeah. It's like I'd just use it. I'd just use it for whatever was in my head. Sometimes in my sketchbooks we'll write little bits of poems or little bits like that as well. And I still do a little bit of that.
This might surprise you, but I seem to remember when I was at art college, when I was doing my foundation year, there wasn't that much of a focus on sketchbooks at all. We were more encouraged to use the art or the craft as part of the creative process rather than focus too much on our sketchbooks. And then I remember when I went to university, to art school down in Winchester, there was very much more, because I did textile design, this has probably got a big part to play, but there was very much more of a methodical process to do with sketchbooks that they wanted to see. So you'd put things like your colour palette together in your sketchbook, your ideas, and it very much had to kind of flow logically. I remember I was criticised for kind of just putting all sorts in there in my sketchbook at university, which is kind of what I do now as an artist, but I think because I was on a design course, it was a lot more structured and restricted as to what you should be putting in your sketchbook.
That also might be a little bit about assessment as well, though, do you think?
Yeah, probably the academic side of it, which they wanted to kind of...
They wanted to see the process.
Yes.
As opposed to it. Yeah, you know what your process is.
Yeah.
So do you have different types of sketchbooks then?
I do, yeah, and I can give you a bit of a peek as well if people are watching by video. So the first one I've got is, I call this my scrapbook because it's very much, I just stick in there what I like, and I use it for collages, for different materials, for experimentation. It's
when
very
you say
loose.
materials, different materials, not material like text, because you talked about textiles, I was just wondering.
It's all sorts. It's everything from paper to fabric to bits that I find lying about. So there's just a lot of different stuff that goes in there.
And for those of you that are just listening, what we're looking at is we're looking at lots of different marks in there. We're looking at collage. We're looking at different sort of colours put together. That's the sort of thing that we're looking at. Yeah.
It's very experimental.
Beautiful sketchbook, by the way.
It is good. I love the pages in it because you've got everything from like fine handmade paper to black card so it's lovely because it almost encourages you to be playful from the start, because it's not like you've got crisp white paper. So that encourages you to kind of be more playful and let loose a little bit.
So I think I've got something that's a bit similar to that. I like using the concertina sketchbook, and it's got a bit thick because it's meant to fit into this sleeve thing that comes with it. But I've got it tied with ribbon because it just doesn't, because I've filled it.
Concertina, it folds out into one sheet, doesn't it,
so
Debbie?
It folds out like this. So that's like what it folds out into, yeah? So this is a similar idea to what you're doing. But what I wanted to discuss was I started this sketchbook by collaging in something. Sometimes I'll do lots of ink or just marks or something, but this particular one's got my poetry just collaged in before I start, and then I've started to go into it with particular colours or whatever and just do ideas of marks and things like that. But it's a similar idea to what you're doing. Because I've thought about doing a similar one with collage. It's playing with composition, it's playing with all sorts of things. What I love about these concertina things is that you can work quite quickly like that, but then really each page is a different idea, if that makes sense. But it
still kind of flows though as well, which is a lovely thing about the concertina, that when it opens up, you've got different pages, but there's also a flow to yours as well.
Yeah. What I like in both of those, they're a particular type. They're a place sketchbook, but they're a very, very important part of that process. Sometimes we play on canvas, and then you'll never see it necessarily. But this is a really great way to feel free to do that. Yeah, it is.
And I think the thing about this kind of scrapbook that I've got is I'll layer things on top of each other. So if I don't like the look of something, I will just put something else on the top of it. You know, I'm not too precious about what goes into it. It's a place to experiment, and I think you need that freedom as an artist to just try things and see how they come out, and give yourself permission to make mistakes as well.
Yes, absolutely. And that idea of putting something down that you then have to work against, you were talking about, you've got different pages in there. It takes all that blank page stuff away.
Yeah, that fear of, the white blank page.
Yeah. So what you can do in a sketchbook is literally go in with a load of blobs or a load of sort of, bit of colour.
Yeah.
And it just literally...
I'll quite often do that to start a sketchbook off, just to get rid of that kind of that fear of the blank page and just get going.
Even though we probably don't think of it as a fear anymore, but it almost just changes things, if that makes sense too.
Yeah. It does.
So another type of sketchbook, have you got one there, or
I'll go to the kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, which is my neat and tidy sketchbook. This one I use to collect inspiration from other artists, designers, so it's a lot neater than the other one. So it's just like a spiral bound sketchbook, and it's got images in here. There's no real rhyme or reason to the type of images that I collect. Quite often they'll be quite designy, things that I find in magazines or a different artist, but it looks a lot different, doesn't it, Debs, from the other sketchbook that I've got?
Yeah, it's very different to the other sketchbook, and it's also something, some people do like mood boards or collections of things in a different way, not necessarily on a sketchbook like that as well, don't they? They have pin boards where you put ideas together. Or with colours or whatever. What you've got there reminds me of my sort of journaling thing. It's a similar A4 type sketchbook, really. So this is amongst my journal, but I'll have bits like that's about the impressionists, and some of it's like writing and stuff. But I am doing things about artists that I've liked. So that's a photograph that I've taken, but then that's a different artist. So I'm starting to relate things that I like with work that other people have done. So it's a reflection of things. So that's a photograph I've taken. So there's things like that that I do. This is my journal, which we'll talk about later, but it's still the same thing what you're doing.
You're still using, I suppose, outside references to think about what it is that you like about that particular artist or that photograph or whatever it might be that relates to your work, which I think is an important
trying
part
to like hone in what it is.
Which I think is an important part of getting inspired and thinking about what you want to do, is looking at how other artists, designers, makers, photographers, whatever it might be. And I think the important thing here is that it also doesn't really matter what you collect in your sketchbook. It could be any sort of visual reference. If you find it interesting, it's valid.
I sometimes like those little swatches, the interior design type colours, to do that on pin boards rather than in sketchbooks. But I like doing bits like that as well. So I do a lot of collecting things together on Pinterest as well.
And I've got one final one here, Debs, to kind of show the variety. I tend to keep a sketchbook whilst I'm in the process of painting and doing a collection, and that sketchbook will be more focused around a particular theme or something that I want to explore, whereas the other two sketchbooks that we've gone through, I consistently add to those all of the time. So if I find something from a magazine clipping or whatever, I'll put in my spiral sketchbook. Or if I'm in the mood just to do a bit of loose drawing in the garden, I'll get my scrapbook out. But I've got a specific one that I use for painting.
Can I just ask, you work in oil?
Yeah.
What mediums do you use in your sketchbooks?
I do. And I was going to come to that as well. So I work in oil paint for my, finished paintings, but for my sketchbooks, what I choose to do, because oil paint takes at least sort of 2 to 3 weeks to dry, to touch dry. So I tend to use things like felt tips, watercolour, things that I can use quickly in my sketchbook to get down an idea. And I don't think you have to be working in the same medium that you work on the actual finished art piece as you do in your sketchbook. For me, it's more about the kind of the visual references and the ideas that I'm working with, which you can then always try and translate into the finished piece of artwork, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm thinking what I do. I think because I work in acrylic, it dries anyway, so that helps.
Yeah, it's much quicker, isn't it?
A lot of people, when they're out sketching, because I do go out sketching, they use... Actually, let me show you one. I do things like thumbnails and thumbnail ideas. This is when I'm actually preparing for a painting. So when I prepare for a painting, I'll do thumbnails. This was actually on a course I went on, so it's sort of not all my idea, but obviously the sketches are mine. And the idea was that I was actually working from photographs on this occasion, but I would quite often work outside and get little thumbnails together. And this was abstracting. So what we were doing here was taking a photograph and then perhaps turning it up the other way, doing all sorts of things like that with it. But I often do this idea of preparing thumbnails and testing colour. And sometimes I'll prepare a small idea of a painting as well.
Yeah, I definitely do that with the colour.
I used to use watercolour a lot, but I quite often use acrylic now within sketchbooks as well. This is some examples of things where I've just done some sketches outside. So I do quite a lot with, I don't know if you can see that there, the little bench. Yeah. The pen and sort of washes and stuff like that whilst I'm outside. I'll do bits and pieces. But also I'll do, this is something that I did in, I've spent hours and hours and hours in sketchbooks just doing colour. So they're secondary colours. I don't know why I like doing it so much, but I just do quite like playing with colour. And I do things like, this is the same as what you're talking about, but I've collected, this is like information. So that's the sort of thing that I do. That's pigment information. I am a bit of a nerd. You didn't realise this, did you? Didn't realise what a nerd I was.
You're a colour nerd.
But the other thing that I'll do, because I like this watercolour paper, so I will also go out and paint. So that's a plein air. So while I'm out, it's not quite finished really, but it doesn't much matter. I like putting tape round the edges of the sketchbook so that you then get quite a clean finish. This is when I'm outside. I will actually use my sketchbook to paint outside. So I do this sort of thing, and I do love that. And I've actually remembered to put the colours, which is really handy. I haven't labelled them what they are, but I can sort of work it out. And just little bits and pieces as I'm outside sketching. And I wanted to show that because a lot of people do that in watercolour. However, this is all acrylic because I quite like acrylic. And I've also got, there's mixed media there, there's pastels, there's all sorts of things. Yeah. So, and sometimes I've got a sketchbook and I'm showing, like, you can see the sky sort of, that might be where I've been demonstrating to somebody how to do it. So sometimes I'll do things like that. And then here I've just got charcoal and just picked up. So I do vary what I do. Thumbnails, this is for compositions and stuff like that. So I do quite a lot of that sort of thing. So this is the more practical planning, or even just creating a painting because I'm outside. So this was at Valley of the Rocks, and I was just doing shapes of rocks and stuff like that. So, and I've sort of finished this sketchbook. And I just think that's quite a nice... I love this sketchbook just to... I suppose to paint. I'm painting in, really, aren't I? But you can see that's quite a lot of different processes in there that I'm doing.
It is.
And that's what I mean by I'm sometimes a bit bitty. I don't always use one sketchbook for one thing.
Yeah. If you come back to that definition of what a sketchbook is, right at the beginning, in there you've got a mix of drawings, some things like charcoal. You've got smaller kind of thumbnail sketches in there that look at composition. You're exploring colour with your different colour palettes, different effects using different mediums. So you're doing the whole range of like the artwork, really, because if you think about an artwork, you've got all sorts of different things feeding into it: composition, colour, how you're using the medium. So you're doing all these different things in the sketchbook that's going to inform your painting, I suppose, aren't you, later on?
And I don't even think of myself as a prolific sketchbook. Some people have got a good sketchbook habit and they do a certain thing and their sketchbooks are beautiful. Mine aren't really that, but I do work quite a lot in them.
What I tend to do is use them as reference points. So when I'm actually doing the painting or the collection, I have the sketchbook out on a certain page just to remind myself of what it is that I'm trying to do with this particular collection, whether it's a particular colour palette that I wanted to use or a particular visual reference. And that just helps me almost not go back into my comfort zone, because part of the sketchbook is initiating new ideas for me that I want to explore. And it can be quite easy just to slip back into the thing that feels kind of comfortable and that you're used to. But part of it for me is kind of pushing ideas.
I was thinking what I do. The last big collection I did, I definitely had a sketchbook for it. And I definitely sketched out ideas. But it was more like those little plan things. And also I went through things like, as I was getting a bit further along, titles and stuff like that. I had those in there as well. But it wasn't quite the same as what you're describing. I really like that idea of a lot like the testy ones that we've looked at, but with more of a focus into one sketchbook. I get what you're saying, and I think that's a really good idea for me.
And
I think as well.
Yeah. I'm just thinking as well, when we were talking through about earlier use of sketchbooks, that might come back to what I was taught when I was doing my design course, that it was quite focused and specific. And so that probably is where it feeds into my art process a bit now, but I use it as an artistic tool to kind of push myself a little bit, If that makes sense.
Yes.
The other thing that I like to do is, we'll go into journaling in a bit, but I think this is kind of different. I'll do a bit of a brainstorm, and I also like to use words to think about what I want to do with my art collection.
Oh, yeah. So that's, what would you call it, a mind map type thing?
Yeah.
Yes.
So for a new collection, I like to put together different words that, different, emotions, themes that I'm trying to convey in my art. And again, that serves as a good reminder as to what I want to get out of the finished artwork.
That's very interesting, because that goes way back to my writing days. And in my writing days, we would do that. So we would do a mind map and we would do free writes, and we're almost describing the same thing. Your journal where you've put in like ideas, getting your collages down, different marks, etc. Those are like more like your free writes, and those mind map ideas of the words. And I really like that as well. I think I do something that's slightly different as well. So I go out and sketch and bring those sketches back. I also do things in the studio, but there's another step that I take that I've got this from Louis Noble, actually, but this is great. If I go out, sometimes I'll go out with cartridge paper. So sometimes I'll go and I'll do plein air exactly as you imagine plein air, have a canvas or have a sketchbook and paint. But sometimes I will go out with a great big sheet of paper. So since I'm moving more towards the abstraction, and I will look at what it is in the landscape and try and capture things within the landscape. And it may be that I look in a certain direction and I get things down, and I might go in another direction. And so I'm actually just drawing or painting the things that I'm interested in. And then I will come back and I will collage that. So I'll just show you that, because it is a very different type of sketchbook. Because this is a sketchbook which is they're almost completed pieces of art in themselves, but really they're inspiration pieces. So, for example, I'm going to show you now, this is an A3 sketchbook, a spiral bound one. And here, for example, is something that I've done from my garden. And it's collaged. So I've gone out with a great big, this is A3, so A2 sheet of paper, painted, and then come back, and you can see that at one point there was like 2 birds on the fence. This is all about the fence. I'm going to show you the one before, because there was a shadow on that fence, and this is all about the tree shadow on the fence. So I've almost framed it, because I have a thing about framing things in nature. So I have collaged to do that. That is quite a different part of a process, and really that's about creating really original type compositions from something that you have become interested in. So it's literally abstracting from reality. You're abstracting, then you're abstracting again by collaging.
I think that's really interesting. And actually, we often think that realistic art is something that's just like a flat image where everything's in focus, everything looks the same, you can see everything very clearly. But when you think about the way that we experience the world as humans, and when you think about the way that the eye works, actually you only really focus on a small bit at a time, and the rest of it is peripheral vision that your imagination kind of makes up from the bits that you can see.
Yes.
And actually, when you're out and about and you are observing, whether it's nature or architecture or whatever it is, I think the way that you've collaged that is actually, for me, a more realistic visual of what it's like to be out and see things, and things that capture your eye. And you're talking there about the shadow and the light and the things that kind of pop out to us. So I think this idea that a realistic image is just like a photograph, it's not real, is it? It's not actually the way that we see and experience things. So for me, it's much more interesting to take an image and kind of cut it up like you've done there and create something new, because I think that's actually a better reflection of how we experience things when we're out for a walk or whatever.
Exactly. And people think that abstraction, I thought until a couple of years ago that abstraction was just something out of people's heads, whereas actually the abstracting from reality, that's why I like to go out and capture different bits, but then almost piece them together like it's like a jigsaw, but with the idea that you're trying to portray, hand over, do whatever, what it is that you've been attracted to. What is it that has actually captured your interest? So that is what I'm about now, and it's quite exciting because that's only really happened over the last couple of years. Before that, I was trying to capture a moment, but it's I think I probably always was trying to capture more. I just didn't understand how. So it's very interesting.
It is.
Oh, one more thing. This is interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever. Now, this is a technique that I quite like doing, but this is a grey sketchbook. and I've got just white and black, sort of white Conti and black charcoal, and so it's more of a tonal sketchbook. So the idea is that you're getting quite quickly the effects that you want to get. The capturing, it's great for capturing like light and stuff like that. So these are just the trees up the chase, but that is a really interesting thing. Actually, I knew there was something that I wanted to say, was that when people look at a photograph and they're working from photographs, this is just generally when you're working in art, I think that what happens is your eye sees everything in the photograph because you've got the photograph there. When you sketch, you'll naturally pick up the things that you're interested in. You'll naturally, although it's hard at first because people get a bit overwhelmed when they first go out there. Once you get to know, once you feel more comfortable, you put more what your eye sees into a sketchbook than you will with a photograph. The photograph captures everything that's there.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, it's funny, I had a workshop a few weeks ago and we were drawing peacocks in the park because we've got them in the local park, and this one lady said to me, I don't know whether I'm focusing the right thing here, but I really like that bit of the feather where it's like, you know, they've got sort of little eyes on the feather and the pattern. And I said to her, which I think it struck a bit of a chord, there's no right and wrong with this. You draw the bits that you find interesting to you, and that's what you should be focusing on. And everyone's going to see different things with whatever it is that you're looking at. So again, it's kind of about making it personal to you, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's got to be personal to you.
Just thinking about the way that different artists use sketchbooks, another thing is travel journals, where it's like an illustrated book of a particular trip that they've been on. Some of them are absolutely gorgeous, and they go out and they have a little holiday and they'll do paintings, drawings, and then they'll put that into its own little book that you can purchase, and it is like a little mini piece of art where they've got observational drawings, sketches, paintings from a particular place that's centred around a theme.
Have you done that? Have you ever done anything like that?
One thing that I did do was like a little bit of a mini project, and it was in the stage where I was just getting back into my art and kind of working out what it is that I wanted to do. I did a series of commuter sketches. So when I used to travel every day from Dunfermline to Edinburgh, which is like a 35-minute train journey, and I'd do observational sketches of people on the train, which sounds quite funny, but you'd be surprised as to how many people just didn't even notice that I was drawing them because they're in their own little world.
Yeah.
But I just found it fascinating how the journey to and from work, there was so much emotion on people's faces because they're probably thinking about, oh no, I've got to, you know, all the trivial stuff that we let us weigh us down, like I've got to send this email to this person, I'm in a meeting to do this today. But I just thought it was really interesting that I could see all of that kind of emotion on their faces, so I started to sketch people. I can see if I can find it for you, Debs. Give me a minute.
Yeah, go on then.
I've just found it. It's quite an old sketchbook, but you can see the kind of some of the characters. And these were done with felt tips that you can water down with like a water pen as well. So they're all very quick sketches, but you can... There was just something about people on the commute where you could capture a feeling, a moment in time that I thought was quite interesting and said quite a lot about people's kind of working lives. And
I like working in sketchbooks, like cartridge sketchbooks, with a black soluble pen and just a water pen. It's so easy to carry. I have done a lot of that gesture drawing type thing of people's movements and that when I've been at. I've filled whole sketchbooks with them. I've gone through patches where I've done that sort of thing. But recently I also did a sketchbook that was, I was in a car, because I often sat as a passenger in a car within lanes, because we're in the country, and you get the light hitting or something. And I did a sketchbook where we were on a car journey and I just was sketching. So it's literally, you see a moment, you sketch. So really, really fast sketches. And they were quite, I'm wondering if I can get hold of it. I'm not sure I can, I'm not sure. But that was some really... So it was landscape as opposed to people, but it was similar. It had that movement because we were in the car, but also that and so the passage of time, and that was amazing. And I'd almost like to develop that into something really. That's something that's interesting. So that's just literally in the car. I was sketching as we were going, and it's got that similar feel to your train journey, but obviously you're observing the people. Before lockdown, we used to go to France, and we'd only take a few people, but we'd go and sketch some beautiful places, and we did some plein air work, but also we did cafe sketching, because in France they don't chuck you out. It's not the same, and there's like lots going on, and that was just lovely. I love it. That is a bit like a travel journal, because when you look, it's got that feel of where you were, and you just remember things, So people sometimes go, oh, look at this is when we were there. So it's like photographs, but in a book. It's more than that, because as you said, you've got the feeling of what was happening.
You capture
at the
that
time.
atmosphere, don't you, somehow?
And you capture the atmosphere, but you also capture it's almost the weather. You capturing the which is the atmosphere, I suppose. So that's interesting too. So we discussed talking about sketchbooks as a piece of art itself, and I think that's interesting. I haven't actually got any examples here myself, but let's just have a little chat about that.
There are artists who choose to use the book as a format of art, so you can purchase the edition books made by artists. So I suppose each of the pages would then be like a small piece of art. So there are artists who focus on book creation. I don't know whether you've ever made any books, Debbie. It's always something that I've wanted to go and do, is like a book making course where you can put your own papers in and create your own sketchbooks. You can make your own concertinas, can't you? You can do that as well. I've never done that. No. And there's another thing that like sometimes people decorate. They either paint or they do mixed media or whatever on the covers as well. And it's a lovely idea, actually. It's just something that we thought that we'd mention, isn't it, really? Because it is a very relevant part of sketchbooks. Yeah, it is. And I mean, some of these the artists who make their own handmade books as art are really prolific. They can go for thousands and thousands of pounds and be set in kind of art collections in their own right as books. I suppose it's just in a different format, isn't it? Than a painting.
And that becomes a form of art, as opposed to something else. That I go to an artist called Cara Baker. I go to her workshops, and she's won awards for sketchbooks. And it's really interesting, because what she does is she goes out and sketches, then she'll come in and then she'll have other sketchbooks that are preparation books, and her sketchbooks are absolutely beautiful. She can work really quickly, so she'll get that diary of where she's been, but she uses that for paintings in the future. And she doesn't work directly from the sketchbooks. She'll work from those sketchbooks into another planning book, which she prepares for the painting. So she has another stage in between. And that's where I see myself being, but not in the way that she's doing it, more collagey or altering things. That's how I it's interesting having that interim thing. But what I was trying to say was, I think that some of her sketchbook work she's actually prepared as a book as well. That's what
Yeah.
where I was going with this. I
Yeah.
think she's, and that's quite interesting sort of thing. You
Yeah.
know, I may be wrong. It might be that it's her series of collections that she's done. I might be quoting it wrong, but definitely her sketchbooks are amazing. You know, and you just think, I wish I could be that organised in my head.
I do get sketchbook envy with some artists, and you look at them and you just think, wow, that's fantastic. But yeah, I probably don't put enough time into my sketchbooks to get that advanced, if that makes sense, into the how they look. I'm probably not that precious with them. That
I'm not precious about them. No. What I definitely do, and I'm trying to not to do it less and less, is you saw in that sketchbook, I'll do one thing and then I'll just do another thing, and I'll just grab the nearest sketchbook and just start doing something else. Yeah, that's what I do, and I know I do it. Yeah. And if I didn't, then I'd probably have beautiful sketchbooks, you know, that would all be. That's what I like about concertinas.
Yeah, but you've got to think about what works for you, though, as a person as well, haven't you? There's no point trying to make, like, something that's very polished that's actually not good for your creative process, and maybe you're just getting hung up on what the thing looks like. I don't think that would be very helpful for me.
No, but it's definitely worth... I think it's worth, in the same way as looking at other artists and how their art is, I think it's worth looking at how people use their sketchbooks, because that in the same way it inspires you to how you could use yours, which is exactly what I've done. Like with that Lewis Noble thing, I would never have thought of doing that, and I do really love that, and I love it more than the next phase, because he showed you about taking it into your art, and that didn't quite work in the same way for me, and I knew it was because that didn't quite work in my process, but that first part really did. So you know, it is very, very interesting to look at other people's work for certain, and on sketchbooks.
Yeah.
I think it is. Does that almost bring us to our next point was about aspirations with sketchbooks, or have we got
taking the words right out of my brain? Yeah. No, but it does lead nicely into different aspirations, doesn't it, of what you'd like to do in your sketchbooks in the future. What are your thoughts, Debs?
I think, interestingly, just from this particular podcast and talking to you, I think that I might get a particular sketchbook that I have lined up for, well, particularly for the next collection that I'm doing.
Yeah,
that's what I'm going to do, so that I'm focusing within a sketchbook. I also love the concertinas to play, and I would like to do more of them. I have this idea that I think they can be quite fast, really, as well, and just just do it. It's sort of easy to just do the concertinas. And they sort of a triggering of ideas. But I do love that idea, and I love the mind mapping as well, because it ties into what I used to do. I think that's really good. So I'm taking that from you, Ruth. That's
glad
great.
That's been helpful.
Yeah.
And you know, you've reminded me that I've got a concertina sketchbook that's just sitting here blank in my studio that I should really get out and give a go. And your paintings in that, and your kind of the way that you've put words in, I think that's lovely. So
I've always wanted to put my poetry in. I just haven't.
Yeah.
I've wanted to for years. I've never really understood how. But I've actually got this little one.
Oh, that's cute.
This is a little concertina, and I love this because it's so small.
Yeah.
But sorry, I've do it the right way around, because I've actually not done one side of it. Let me do it. Sorry, I've tried to get the beginning of it. Yeah. So this is the one with the blobs of ink.
Yeah.
And then you're starting to work. So I've actually gone into the garden and just found shapes and started to,
Yeah.
And that is so,
Love that.
it's so easy to do, and it's so relaxing.
Yeah.
And
It's
what
very
I found
effective
really
though as well.
interesting was I got to a certain point. I'll show you this one. This page has been collaged in from an old sketchbook, and I just collaged it in. So this is all from the garden, and although it might not mean much to you, we've changed the garden since, and it's sort of, it reminds me of things as well.
Yeah.
And I'm just like,
Lovely.
so I love that because it's almost handbag size, that is.
Yeah.
Just so small.
Yeah.
And I do love the preparing sketchbooks. So I think for the summer I've got a sketch. This is an aspiration. Oops, sorry about that. Dropping art materials. So for the summer I've got this little sketchbook, and I've talked to the class and I said to them, bring sketchbooks in, and we've got a sketchbook for the summer. Let's get it filled. Let's just do it. But you know, and I'm going to try and make that one pretty and not put things right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
When I say pretty, I mean, you know, consistent.
Yeah. One thing that I haven't tried yet in a sketchbook that I want to do is, and I've seen other artists do this, is kind of treat the page more like a 3D object where they've got bits cut out of the page, and then you can see the other page underneath.
Oh, I never thought of that.
Which is quite interesting. I mean, some artists go as far as kind of having, I suppose, 3D sketchbooks where they've got different layers and they've got different shapes kind of cut out. That's something that I've always wanted to give a try to see how that would work. I suppose it relates a little bit to my painting because I like to layer a lot of different layers, and quite often there's kind of translucent layers and things going on in the background, and I'd like to play with that foreground and background idea within a sketchbook. So that's something that I'd like to give a try. Maybe
that's really
year.
Interesting. So that's a challenge.
Yeah.
They come back in a few months' time and show me your layered sketchbook. I hadn't even thought of that. That's just something that's not had been on my radar.
I think it's Pinterest that I've seen things like that on. So have a look at Pinterest. There's some really interesting ways that you can use paper, almost like as a craft.
Yeah, because I layer in sketchbooks, which is why they get so full and can't shut. But yeah, I do like the idea of decorating the covers as well sometimes. It'll be interesting to come back to this in a year's time or something. Yeah,
definitely, to see where we are, where we've got to. Another thing that we've not discussed is the journaling side of it and the writing side of it, which I think is something that we both do. Personally, I journal every morning. I sit down and it's a bit like therapy for me, for getting everything out on the page before my day starts. It just helps clear my head. But I also put down thoughts and ideas within that are specifically towards the kind of the art stuff in a small journal to do with painting. So I'll use that as ideas come up, and maybe it's that it's not specifically kind of visual things, but more on the intellectual side of things, the mental side of things about painting that I want to put down in words.
In your journals, though, do you put your painting? What I mean is, do you put photographs of your paintings in there?
No, so I've got a separate written journal that I use. The only visual stuff that I'll put in there is sometimes I'll doodle in there if I'm trying to express an idea or something that I want to do. But I won't put pictures in there. It will just be, I mean, if anyone was to pick it up, it would just look like a ramble, a ramble of ideas. It wouldn't really make sense to anybody else.
Sometimes it's getting it out, and you don't necessarily even have to reflect back, do you?
Yeah.
Sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's how you work.
Yeah. Or
whether you go back to it. That's what I'm asking.
I do go back to it sometimes if I've put something down that's I think, oh, that's worth a revisit and worth thinking about and worth trying to express as a painting or a sketch or whatever else. Then I'll go back to it and revisit the idea. And then other times I'll look back at it and just think, what the heck was that? Turn over the next page and not revisit it again.
My journaling, I think, has come only recently, the last couple of years. It's since I've been honing in what my art interests are. I went through a patch of seeing this art mentor, and she was talking to me about go back through everything, your old stuff. And then I did Find Your Joy as well, and there was quite a lot of emphasis on journaling in there and looking at your art and asking yourself questions of really what interests you, what has worked in a piece, what hasn't worked for you, as opposed to somebody else might see it differently, but and what you want to take forward and all of that. So my journals tend to include pictures as well, sometimes other pictures of my own art. It could be it's like a crop of some part of it that I liked, and sometimes it'll be I really don't like this one and why it is. So it's like a reflection on pieces, but also it's all about seeing patterns of what I'm interested in. That's what the journal tends to be for me, I think. And obviously it's still quite new, so it will develop, but it does tend to lead you to what's going to be next. That's the idea, I think. Of where I see the journaling. I still feel like, because my studio practice, I almost feel like I need a journaling hour in the week, like quite a block of time, as opposed to your morning pages. I almost need a block to reflect on what's happened. And what I'm finding at the moment is that because classes take you in different directions to where your art's taking you, and it's that focus. So I'm almost wondering whether what you're talking about for the collection will act in a similar way, but for a particular collection. That's what I'm seeing from what we've discussed today.
Yeah, and when I have got that sketchbook for my collection, I do tend to put in notes around what it is that I find interesting about an image, whether it's the colour, the composition. I suppose a similar way to what you're doing, Debs, is really trying to pull out, well, what is it that I like about that image? What is it that I want to do with my artwork? To almost be like your own critique and reflect things back to yourself.
Yeah, it is exactly that. Yeah, but not in a... Yeah, it is like a critique, good and bad sort of thing, what you're not wanting to move forward with. It could be about a new material you've used. How is that working? It could be anything, really. But it is that stopping to think about it as opposed to just ploughing on.
Yeah, and getting very specific sometimes about what you want, because we talked about this before, but because there's so many different options in art, it can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes. So for me, it helps to focus in on certain aspects of whether it's colour, composition of art, because there's so many different options, so many different ways that you could develop things, that for me it helps to focus in and think about those things really specifically, because otherwise it can be a little bit overwhelming and it's easy to get lost, isn't it, without having that some sort of way to kind of pinpoint what it is that you want to do. And I find a sketchbook is a really useful tool to do that.
We use sketchbooks a lot, don't we, really?
I actually use them in more ways than what I realised. It's only really when we start talking about how we use them and why we use them that you realise all of the different things that they kind of unlock for me.
Yeah, I think that we use them to collect information, them to prepare particular paintings or collections. We use them to reflect. We use them to literally to paint, because I'll do paintings in them sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to experiment. So that's a lot of the creative process when you think about it.
Yeah,
and
it
I
is.
even at the end when we're finishing, I will write, like in a collection, I will write titles, and I will just tick off, just so that it's all together in one place. I might have it somewhere else on an electronic form, but sometimes it's nice just to have that on a bit of paper somewhere that's together. Yeah. So that's almost every part of the creative process when you think about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is more than that. I agree, more than you realise. That's probably why sometimes it gets a little bit bitty if you're still working on your process. You might not have, each bit of your process separate, because sometimes it jumps about a bit, doesn't it?
And it merges into each other, and it's not like sometimes you'll start thinking about the next collection while you're working on the one that you're on at the moment and things like that, which is normal, I think, and absolutely fine. But there's no set way of doing it either, is there? So it's working out what kind of suits you, because you could be really granular about it, but then I like having the freedom to be able to let the ideas flow as well. So it's working out, what works best.
Okay, so if we're talking about takeaways, because we've decided at the end of each episode we're going to do these takeaways, I'm wondering, my biggest takeaway from this is that although I've always thought of sketchbooks as important, I think over the years they've become more and more important. And I think my current point in my art practice is that I'm truly wanting to focus on my process. And so I'm going to really take on board what we've said today and try and focus on exactly where my sketchbooks are in my process, because I think that's quite a big takeaway, to be honest. I think for the next collection, I'm going to almost, not plans to, but use the sketchbooks to help with that next collection. That's what I'm planning to do, and we'll see where we get from there. And that's a big takeaway. It's that it feels a bit woolly because I'm not quite sure exactly how, but that doesn't mean that it's not important. It's like those beginnings of ideas. That's what they sometimes feel like. It feels quite a big takeaway. Yeah. How about you?
The thing that stuck with me was when we were talking about the aspirational element of sketchbook, and it's got me thinking about where I want to go next with my sketchbooks. And in particular, when I was talking about the kind of the paper cutouts, the layering, I want to use my sketchbooks to dig a bit deeper into that element and almost really hone in and focus on what I'm trying to do with my painting, taking that back into the sketchbook and then using that to inform the next set of paintings. So it's almost like really going deep into something and developing an idea even more, and just using my sketchbook to really explore my ideas, what I'm trying to do in my art, and just take it to that next level. Because I think, I've realised during this conversation just actually what an important tool a sketchbook is and how much that you use them. And going into that process with a little bit more conscientious around what it is that you're trying to do, I think it's really going to help me just develop my artwork and push my ideas a bit more.
Yeah, I think exactly that. I think that going into it with a more mindfully, more sort of as opposed to just using them, which is what I've probably done perhaps less. I've been more mindful in my journals than I have in my sketchbooks, actually, I think. Which is interesting.
It's been a good chat. It's definitely made me think about quite a few things. So it's always good to see other artists' sketchbooks as well, because quite often it's something that's a bit private, isn't it? So it's been lovely seeing your artwork, Debs, and how you use your sketchbooks.
Yeah, it's really inspiring, really interesting to see how you've I think hearing about how you prepare for a collection and that is really interesting. So, and also seeing I loved that your little sort of bit where you collage and do just different things and different ideas.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people think that sketchbooks have to be incredibly finished and pretty, and it's not like that at all. No, you need to have, not when you're on the experimenting sort of phase of it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to hear what other people think as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Let us know what you think and how you use sketchbooks. So whether you're watching this on YouTube and you've seen all the sketchbooks, or whether you're listening, I hope you've really enjoyed this conversation. Let us know how you use your sketchbooks and what your takeaways are from this episode. Next time we'll be talking about the benefits of creativity and how they're good for our health. And I'm really looking forward to that. We always enjoy these chats.
Too.
So thank you, Ruth, for having a chat with me. And thanks to everybody for listening.
Yeah,
I'm
thank
say
you.
Goodbye.
See you soon.
Yeah, bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.